Good evening. Hello, I'm Caroline Bowman, Director of Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you all this evening for a highly anticipated design talk. Tonight I'm delighted to welcome Thom Browne back to Cooper Hewitt, an internationally renowned designer of men's and women's ready-to-wear with legions of fans. Thom launched his label in 2001 with 5 bespoke men's suits. Meticulously tailored, unexpectedly proportioned, the suits were nothing less than a preemptive strike against the nation's sartorial business casual malaise. Thom's fresh interpretation of the traditional suit reawakened the public's love of classic styling and made formal dressing cool again. Others quickly adapted his signature slim fit, and the designer is now widely credited with revolutionizing men's fashion. In recognition of his creative vision and widespread influence, Thom was honored with the CFDA Menswear Designer of the Year Award in 2006, and again in 2013, the GQ Designer of the Year in 2008, and of course, Cooper Hewitt's National Design Award for Fashion Design in 2012. Thom Browne's work has been featured in major museum exhibitions both here and abroad, including Cooper Hewitt's third triennial, Design Life Now, the Met Museum's Costume Institute, and London's V&A. However, he truly entered fashion history when First Lady Michelle Obama chose a custom-designed Thom Browne navy silk checkout coat and checked pattern dress to wear for the President's 2013 inauguration ceremony. Thom first met the First Lady at our National Design Awards luncheon at the White House a few months prior to the inauguration, so we like to take credit for this introduction. Thom is the first fashion designer invited to curate our Selects series, for which we ask influential artists, designers, thinkers, and authors to mine and interpret Cooper Hewitt's extraordinary collection of over 210,000 design objects. Given Thom's genius for theatrical storytelling, we were keen to see just how the riches of Cooper Hewitt's collection would inspire him. True to Thom's love of spectacle, he chose over 50 of our superbly crafted frames and mirrors, some more than 300 years old, and installed them in an immersive environment of his own design. A room within a room was built inside the Marx Gallery and blanketed with Osborne & Little's laser-engraved holographic wall covering, recently acquired by Cooper Hewitt. It's a somewhat psychedelic celebration of reflection, and I hope you all saw it before you came downstairs today. It is integral to Cooper Hewitt's mission to give the public access to inspiring design, so I'm thrilled that our visitors now have the opportunity to experience the very unique imagination and drama of a Thom Browne installation. For our program tonight, Thom will be in conversation with Matilda McQuaid, who is Deputy Director of Curatorial and Head of Textiles here at Cooper Hewitt, and who partnered with him many, many days in making the exhibition. Please join me in welcoming Thom and Matilda.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming.
All right, can everyone hear us? Yeah. Good. All right, so one of the things that I find so amazing about these Select series is that not only do artists and designers, such as yourself, come in and mine our collection, but they also leave their own imprint somewhere. And I think you've left a footprint, a few footprints, but in your exhibition. But I think it's important to see an aspect of the artist's work within the context of the museum collection. So I'm curious, my first question is, and we're always interested in process in the Cooper Hewitt, what was the process in coming up with this idea of mirrors and frames? Looking back at some of your fashion shows, which we will, what I'm going to do is kind of flip through some images that Thom can speak to that relate to some of the questions I'm going to be asking. But first, talk about the design process and how it comes about.
Well, for me, being honored by being able to do this project. I really kept myself open to not really coming in with an idea of what I wanted to do. And really, the first thing was going to the archives and going to the warehouse in Newark and really seeing what the collection was and seeing, because I didn't really know what was really in the collection. Of course, I knew about the textiles here at the Cooper Hewitt and how important textiles are in the collection. But I thought as a fashion designer, I thought that would be too expected if I were to go into the textiles. So for me, going through the collection in the warehouse, and then it just happened to be something that I was interested in my own collections, was the idea of reflection in mirrors. So really seeing some of the important 18th century mirrors was really where it all started. And then, you know, really coming to you and saying, okay, how many mirrors do you have and where are they? I want to see all of them, and I want to really showcase that idea and not particularly showcase one specific one. I thought it was important because of, you know, how I do approach my collections and my shows. I like it to be an overall experience as opposed to focusing on one thing. And I think in doing that, it almost creates the idea that all of it is even more valuable. And so that's really how it started. And the idea of reflection was something that reflection and uniformity has been something that has been with me from really my first collection.
But before we talk about reflection and uniformity, because I remember your first idea relates to this picture on the screen.
Yeah.
You wanted a big dining experience.
I did.
And we didn't. And so what happened?
Okay, well that, you know, if you're going to talk about process, you have to, I think in design, you have to be open to evolving along and being able to navigate through the design process. And for me, what was most important was working with something from the collection that really stood out for me. And the mirrors stood out a lot more than the dining room table.
I should tell you, we should tell them the whole story, Tom. I mean,
Okay.
we looked at tiles, and we have.
There were.
It wasn't just automatically mirrors.
No, I mean, that's really how it happened. That's how I approached design. I was open to really seeing the collection, and yeah, I mean, I went there and I thought because of if there was an amazing dining room table that we could use, then doing that, but that didn't work out.
Yeah, we didn't have a big enough one.
And then I thought, you know, there were amazing tiles, and I thought it'd be amazing to, you know, almost delft tile the whole room.
Right.
So that was an idea. That didn't happen. So, you
Close,
know,
though.
yeah, it did.
Yeah, that's
Close. But I think that's the important thing, especially here in the museum, it being a design museum. Like, this story of being able to design and be flexible in regards to design. So I guess, yeah, I didn't remember it as well as you did, but yeah, it was a good experience in regards to, and even how the room looks now, it's not exactly how I thought it initially was going to look like.
Yeah. I think it looks so much better than what I thought.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I knew it was going to look good, but it's like it looks even better. I think, I mean, it's the first time too that we haven't been able to go into the room. I mean, and inspect each object, and that was very, very purposeful on your part,
Yeah.
because you wanted it. I mean, you should speak for yourself, but you wanted it to, you know, be like a period room.
I wanted it to be true to how I approach my shows and my collections also. And my shows, I do like to be an entire experience for people. And of course, afterwards you can go and you can get close and you can observe the details of everything. But I think seeing the overall experience made everything that much richer, I think, in the room. And I think, and then also too, I mean, it's the most beautiful room, and in a way, using the wallpaper to enhance the mirrors even more, because I think the room is so beautiful on its own. It's basically an installation on its own without anything in the room, and the mirrors would have looked amazing in the room, but I think they,
It would have probably been overpowered.
yeah, they're a lot more complemented by the neon wallpaper.
Yeah. And in fact, what to me is so interesting is looking, I certainly noticed the ceiling, but I notice even more now, and it actually looks like one giant mirror up there too, or a frame, an empty frame. So it really, contextually, it looks very much like the other objects in the room itself. And I think that the wallpaper really sets off those mirrors much better.
Yeah, because
They
the initial idea was to use mirror and to hang the mirrors on the mirror. And I think that's another way of how design and working along with what is actually going to work, because the mirror wasn't going to work. The wallpaper is a better idea.
Mhm.
It just turned out to be better because the mirrors look better on the wallpaper as opposed to a mirror.
And it's also part of our collection. So it's like a total immersive, collection show. I mean, is the process, I mean, we're looking at some of these images from your, which show is it? In Paris, this was the Paris Men's Spring Summer 13. Yeah. So in terms of, when you prepare for a show like this, is it similar to preparing for a show like upstairs?
It's different every show, and that's why with the installation upstairs, I don't go into a show, a collection with, so strict in regards to I have to do it this way. Shows start sometimes with the fabrics, or sometimes they start with the overall concept. So it's different every time. I mean, this show, it was really just almost the idea of taking a very classic gray suit and putting it in an infinity box and creating the idea of a uniform can be infinitesimally beautiful.
Mhm. And what was interesting about this show, sort of bringing up ideas of uniformity, is that when you first walked in, because this is one show that I was able to go to, and when you walk in, you look at all the models around, the suits look the same, but then when you get closer and you realize the subtle differences, and I think that that's what is so unique about your work. And so how does that, how do you come up with those subtle differences, and why is it so important to you?
I think one of the reasons why I do like to put on big productions, because I think the detail and the work that goes into the actual collection and the collection itself, when you get close to all the pieces, the work and the detail and how seriously made each piece is so important. And I think in a way it's more important for you to see that close up as opposed to from far away, because I think the beauty is in how kind of small and beautifully subtle the details are. In regards to the gray suits, it was more having a beautifully made suit, and every one of them was different, but in the context of the installation they all look the same. But the story really playing off of an idea that I've used really from very early on, in that a very uniform idea I think very interesting, and I think there's something very confident and unique in somebody that can adopt that idea of uniform.
And when you talk about uniform too, because there's ways of expressing individuality when you have a uniform. And it could be slight, and I think this is where some of the details come in. It could be just a slight little difference, and it can look generally the same, but that slight little difference makes it unique from one next to it.
Yeah, I think that's when the person's own personal style really comes in, and I think that's what is more interesting with it.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of the visitor can't go into the space, and which is interesting. So how, when you were thinking of the visitor and this idea of having them peer in, like in a period room, or what were you what did you want them to experience?
One,
from that?
yeah, I like the idea of it feeling like a period room. I like, I love being in museums and being able to just like peer into the room. I think there's, that romance and that little bit of mystery that, that you can't touch. But for me, it was, really just the idea of being able to show the room as an entire experience. That was what was really, as simple as it is, that was what was more important to me. Because I think it made all the objects that much more important.
Yeah. And talking about sort of experiences, I mean, here's another fashion show from, this is the New York Women's Autumn Winter 2011 that was this at the New York Public Library?
Yeah.
So how do you pick these places? I mean, to me, it's like, it looks like it could be right out of some kind of movie. And I know movies have played an important part. So talk a little bit about that.
I mean, the experiences and the stories in my shows really come from movies or, just very, they are referencing something specific that I've seen, a movie or a person or something specific. But I do like to forget enough of that reference to make sure that you don't see too much of that reference. I grew up Catholic, so, let's play on my Catholic upbringing and have nuns and priests interacting in somewhat provocative way at the beginning and then reveal the collection. So, I do like to just tell a story with the collection and I do like to entertain. I think there's something interesting about this. The clothing is so seriously made and the collections are very seriously thought out, but I think there's something really interesting, and I think it makes it more interesting when you surround it by a story that sometimes isn't so serious and entertaining.
But do you ever worry that, or are you ever concerned about that the story or narrative or the performance overshadows the fashion?
No, because I think I would never put something in front of people that I wasn't so secure in how seriously designed and made the collection is. And I just would never put something in front of somebody. It's like some of the, as provocative and conceptual as one of the pieces in the collection can be, it's never jerry-rigged together just for effect. I've done a three-legged trouser, and that three-legged trouser was as seriously made as, a normal two-legged trouser. Haven't done one-legged yet. I never worry about that.
What about this show?
Well, this
You
is
have
the
ballerina,
homage to Oscar Schlemmer.
Uh-huh.
And really playing with that whole Bauhaus kind of idea of just what a genius he was in regards to shape and movement, and so that's really where all the shapes come in.
And mirrors again.
Funhouse mirrors, yeah.
So was that something you were considering for our show, or your show?
No.
Yeah, no funhouse mirrors.
No funhouse mirrors.
Just infinity.
Yeah.
And this one is your, the Paris Men's Autumn Winter 14.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that.
This is this is a very important show because I think it is one of the shows that is very indicative on how I really approach my shows now. And that being, it's of course the collection, and the collection is important, but I am starting to feel like it's important to surround the collection by not just an experience or a story, sometimes an installation or something that is more outside of the world of fashion. And I think this one is important because I think it marries the world of fashion and an art installation in that the installation is covered in menswear fabrics, but I think on its own, I think it stands on its own. And I would never give my collections credit in being art or, that, but I think the installation of the show I think it is a piece of art.
What about your clothing as design? Do you see it as design?
Definitely design, yeah. And I don't know, that's...
You got the design award, so I hope you...
No, I mean, I think it's, the world of art and fashion, sometimes it's, it's always a conversation.
Right.
And I think, I would never give... My collections are seriously made pieces of clothing.
Mhm.
And that's what they are. And I think there are designers in fashion that do create the most beautiful pieces of art in their collections.
And are you saying those are more temporal or more ephemeral than what you make?
No, I mean, I think,
Or is the quality less?
no. No, I think it's the whole thing, like, I think it's, I don't know, I mean, it's giving yourself credit as being, I think I make beautiful clothing.
Mhm. Well, and I know, I think we talked about this in our initial interview in the brochure about sometimes people just like to over-intellectualize things, and I think, you have that famous quote about
Ignorance is bliss.
No, not ignorance is bliss. Anyway, I forgot to write it down, but it's not about being perfectly made, but...
Oh, I think it becomes really boring if it's perfectly made and, there's so much... what did I say? I think something
I don't want to
it's
make
really
it,
boring.
something like, I don't want to make it perfect, but it should be perfectly made, or something to that.
Well, I think, it gets really boring if it's so
If it's
serious and
perfect,
it's so
right,
perfect, yeah.
Right.
I think a little bit of,
So you didn't iron your shirt, did you?
and no, I never
Okay,
ironed my shirt. No, I think, and I don't know what I'm saying.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you, I'm sorry. No, but it's that, it's almost like a Japanese sense of beauty too, where, there's always some imperfection,
Yeah.
small imperfection, and it can be as, a wrinkled shirt or, mismatched socks, whatever it is, but it's, it can still be beautiful.
Yeah.
And
I
that
think,
contrast too, between sort of the perfect, tailored shirt and then that other twist on
I
it.
think it also even plays into, using references for your work, but making sure that you forget enough of that reference to make it your own. And I think that's what makes a reference more interesting and makes it more relevant to what you're doing.
I mean, one thing that I really appreciate about you as a designer, artist, is that you're pretty humble and you're empathic. And you feel for the visitors when they come in. And in fact, your statement upstairs talks about that you want the visitor to feel confident when they look in the mirror, and people say, well, you can't really see yourself in the mirror. I said, well, look at the wallpaper, you can see yourself sort of in the mirror. But, so how did that, I mean, and you're a fashion designer, sometimes that could be, mutual or contradictory, I guess, in terms of this humbleness and empathy. So where does it come from?
Really?
I don't know.
I guess my parents are.
Allentown?
Allentown. No, I think, especially upstairs, I think what makes the installation more interesting, I think, is that everybody has their own experience, because, the person looking in the mirror that's their experience, and no one can have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's what makes it, special to every person that walks into the room. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the visitors have all been sort of awed by when they, come in and sort of see it, and you see just, cell phones kind of photographing every single angle. So I think that you've definitely, they feel something, they're drawn to it, and even though it's not something you can go into, you can go far enough into to feel that sort of experience of the whole space.
Yeah, and that was really what I want. I want people to have an experience, and you know, it could be an experience. Maybe somebody walks in and they don't like it, and I think that's also important. I think there's something really important about design, that you're not doing something that's going to be pleasant for everyone. I think if you want to do interesting design, or if you want to be in any way provocative, you have to expect somebody not to like it. And if you're not expecting that, then you're kidding yourself. And I think that is the true test of good design, is making sure that you are a little bit nervous, and that you feel like, you feel 100% confident in what it is and what you're doing, but that you know that it's pushing it far enough so that somebody may, not everyone's going to like it. And I think that's more important.
And does that kind of tie into this whole idea of, because it's interesting, this show has, except for, the 102 pairs of brogues, there's nothing else, of your fashion in the exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
So how was it working on a show when your own clothing wasn't the center of the show?
It was easy because the collection of mirrors was something that was so I connected with,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very easy just because of that, and also too that idea of the mirror and the story of reflection, and it just was something that I thought was really interesting, and I thought it would work in the room, and it just so my
It didn't matter.
it didn't matter at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
But your shoes provide an incredible texture, I think, to the whole installation, and I think work well with the wall coverings on the floor and on the walls. So I think it gives that sort of. I think it would look empty without the shoes there.
Well, I think, like you were saying at the beginning, I think it's important that people walk in, they see, of course, the collection from the museum, but also see, okay, what is Thom bringing to this, other than just putting the mirrors in the room, which would have been, interesting, but I think I wouldn't have put the installation with the shoes and the desk in the room if it didn't really enhance the collection for the museum.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what was most important for me, was that it really created a whole story that enhanced the collection.
I should keep on going. So tell me a little bit more. People talk about, and you've talked about how movies influence you,
Mm-hmm.
books. Can you just name a few? And if there's anything, like in this particular show, which is the Paris Men's Autumn Winter 15,
Mm-hmm.
what was the story you were telling in here?
This was a story. It's a story of a young guy who is a writer, and he really spent his whole life trying to write the perfect story. And he just happened to wake up, and this was the last day of his life, and he had finished that perfect story. So he was ready to go.
Is this autobiographical?
No, I'm not a writer at all. But I think, and that's why, the stories are they're never taken seriously or in a dark way. You listen to that story and, somebody could think like, well, that sounds kind of, morbid. But it was more the story and respecting somebody that has, really wanting to do something so important with their life, and then appreciating that life and simply that.
Was it from a book or a movie, or something you had seen, or was it just
No,
straight out of your mind?
Straight out.
And one thing that we also had talked about in the interview is dreams. I know Mickey was talking about dreams, and so do you have a lot of strange dreams?
I do dream a lot, yeah.
And does any of this come out in your work?
It does, I think, subconsciously, but I am the worst. You know how you always want to remember the dreams, and I
Right.
never seem to remember my dreams. But I do remember waking up thinking that was a bizarre dream. But I think subconsciously, yeah. But I mean, the stories, because there's so many different like kind of things that come into my stories in the collections. It's never I think they all work as a story, but it's not like I set out the story and that's exactly what you see. I mean, like with
this one, did you have, so you
well,
did
this is
have,
not really a story. This is just I think, a beautiful experience. I mean, this is really just, the idea of my appreciation for Japan and their appreciation for, well, basically everything. And, the beauty of the kimono and the fabrics being developed felt, they weren't developed in Japan, but they just made the most beautiful kimono. And, then the idea of taking very sophomoric Japanese references and then intarjaing them into very classic pieces of clothing, which the work that went into all the intarsia pieces is incredible and is so intense and made the most beautiful pieces of clothing. And so it was basically just the appreciation of beautiful things. And then the women's show that season 2, taking that whole idea, but then playing with the idea of the Japanese schoolgirl, but then placing it in America, and then turning the schoolhouse upside down. And so it was like an evolving story that just created the story at the end. It wasn't like at the beginning I thought
so it's like
all of this
vignettes?
at once. Yeah.
Kind of like
There were like little ideas that just came along the way, and it just created the story. Like the hair, I mean, it all kind of happened along the way.
So how long did this, in this particular show, I mean, when did you start thinking about it and when did it all kind of coalesce?
Well, we never have enough time for the shows, but with the collections themselves, the shows, it's almost like 6 months. I mean, it's never really like that because I'm always late. Not so late, but sometimes it's just in order to create an interesting idea, it just takes longer than sometimes it takes longer. And this is why sometimes the fabrics being developed can work into the story, or the idea works into the fabric. So it all like kind of plays into each other.
So in this one, does fabric ever come first? Or is it always
The idea of the intarsia fabrics definitely was one of the first ideas, yeah.
And you said that wasn't done in Japan, it was done here? Or was it?
It was pieced, well, men's, it was done not all in Japan. But it's all.
But you said there was hundreds of pieces?
Yeah, each piece, there are a million, hundreds of pattern pieces per piece. Because everything, it wasn't appliqued, it was all intarsia to create that pattern. So it would be a lot easier to applique, but we took the hard way in intarsia.
It's incredible. And so what about, now this one, this is a relatively recent one, right?
This is the last men's show.
So,
Well, this is where, the idea of mirrors, the idea of the mirrors here played into, influencing and coming into this show. And the idea of all of the frames were mirrors that the story of the collection was a person in the early 20s lived through the Depression and loved his clothing so much that he wore it until it was very threadbare. And as opposed to going out and buying new clothing, he loved his clothing so much that he didn't need to buy new clothing. He wore it and it got even more beautiful as it aged. And then at the end, him seeing his reflection from when it was brand new. See, the stories sometimes aren't as interesting as it, but as an overall effect, it kind of
yeah, because
kind of
you
looks
see,
good.
and you see each stage in that deterioration, right, of the
Yeah.
garments.
And that's why the getting close to the overall experience was really beautiful and worked as a show. But then getting close to the clothing themselves, I mean, seeing the work that went into the actual aged pieces is is just really beautiful because
So how did they age them?
well, some of them were actually embroidered to look old, and then some were actually aged. Like we worked it and washed some and tore. But I didn't want it to look. I wanted it to look like we did it, as opposed to just throwing it in the washer and dryer.
So is all of your work done here in the States? Or do you do it all over, depending
Well, a lot
on
of
the
the
kind of
embroidery
skills?
is done over, not here. We do some here, but most of the collection pieces we do actually do here in New York.
Okay. So, because you have your,
Yeah.
the tailor.
Yeah.
Okay. And this one, this is our Washington Square Park.
Washington Square Park, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this was really taking, the idea of the men's show was like taking clothing that you love to wear and you, as opposed to going out and buying new clothing. The women's idea was not it becoming threadbare, actually taking the clothing and reappropriating different clothing to create different pieces of clothing. And that was the idea with this collection.
So you have the tie that's appropriated from,
Well, then the tie really came from the idea of tailoring is very important for my women's collections as well, and then also too the idea of using men's references and the tie. I know a lot of women don't like wearing ties because it's very constricting, and a lot of guys don't either. But taking the idea of the tie and creating almost a fascinator, out of the tie.
so one thing that's interesting in terms of your fashion shows, because there's only a exclusive few that get the opportunity to see them, which is, quite an honor. And showing a few kind of sort of press. So it's a very ephemeral experience. So how do you handle permanence? Like this is actually much more permanent kind of installation or show than you're normally used to doing. And how does that either change your approach, or how do you, what is there a difference between the two? A more ephemeral fashion show or a longer, standing exhibition, or some of your other environment or your showrooms?
No, I wish people could see, or more people could see the shows, because we do approach them as real experiences that we wish could live past the shows.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really one of the reasons why a lot of the shows are being surrounded by installations. And there's like the animal and forest scene at Menswear Fabrics.
Right.
Is something that is in storage, and I would love to be somewhere because it's just a beautiful object, and I think a lot of people would be interested in seeing it. And yeah, knowing that that's going to be up for 6 months it's amazing, because the show lasts 20 minutes at the longest, and that, believe it or not, people think that's long. You spend 6 months on a collection, and people complain if your show's more than 15 minutes. So. Yeah. So I wish people could see more. But I think every designer would say the same thing, because there's so much work and there's just so much emotion and so much a part of who you are in those 6 months that that is gone in 15 minutes, and sometimes it's over and it's just too short.
Yeah. And what is the percentage of the clothes that you show in those shows that actually become commercially viable, or that you actually?
It depends. It depends on how conceptual the show is, but a lot of the conceptual pieces are, you don't have to make a lot of them because you can't make a lot of them, and a lot of them do get purchased. Yeah.
So this is one of your, this is your shop here.
Mm.
So how do you treat this differently from, or do you treat it differently from your fashion shows in terms of presentation? Does this evolve over time? Does it change? Does it stay the same?
The stores, pretty much, it's like one idea. I mean, I think because I think especially with the stores, I'd like it to be a very clear idea when people walk in on what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't changed that much because I specifically wanted it to feel very timeless, and I wanted it to feel like it didn't need to change. And I think in a way that is sometimes the problem with fashion, and how sometimes people think it always needs to change as opposed to just evolve along the way. And I think having a really clear idea on what you want to design for people and represent for people in regards to what you design, and then evolve every season, I think is so much more interesting than schizophrenically changing.
Yeah, because you're almost hard pressed to find the clothing in there, you know? Because
Well,
it looks like it could be a reception area, or, you know.
that's an old picture.
Oh, it is, okay, sorry.
There's more. in
Hey.
there. No, I mean, yeah, I don't where there isn't any clothing there.
There's a little rack over there.
No, I mean, I do also approach my retail stores not in a true, like, retail way.
Mhm.
I do like it to be, just like upstairs, I like people to walk in and it to be an experience. And, I mean, we do very good business down there, but, and there is more in there. But I think it's more interesting that, you know, it's a whole thing. It's not just you're walking in to buy clothing, you're getting some type of experience as
Right.
well.
And this is your Tokyo store.
Mm-hmm. The door, like, believe me,
Who was the architect?
I worked with a guy named, what is his name? Katayama, and he's from Wonderwall.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Worked very closely with him. And, you know, the one thing about the stores too, going forward, it's been designed. So it's not like they have to change. I think certain markets, and especially Japan, because of how I think they appreciate conceptual design, I love the idea of a retail store with no windows, because I hate mannequins, so I didn't need any windows. But I also wanted the door to be even smaller than that, but they said it would be bigger.
It's hard to see even how big it is.
It
It looks really narrow.
Yeah, it has the feeling like it's really small.
The sign is inside.
And the sign's on the inside, yeah. Yeah, I never have signage on the outside of my store.
So you don't know if you're at the right place.
Well, no, you can see.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see.
And here's some more. But I still don't see any clothes.
Well, these are not.
I don't know, this is-
There is clothing.
So is that an
And there's a bar
office?
downstairs too.
Is this?
No, each floor, because there is, the idea of my first was really to replicate or reference a 1950s American office. And so all the floors have a feeling of an office, in regards to a desk and chairs. And,
Mhm. So similar to what is upstairs.
well, upstairs was really, and that's what almost plays into the idea of design really evolving. The idea of the desk and the chair and the uniform idea was one of my first shows. A show I did in Florence where I had
I think we have that.
40 guys all in the same gray suit.
Sorry.
Yeah, this show. And so the idea of a very uniform idea, and the idea of it all looking so interesting because it was that experience. And so upstairs you're getting like an evolution of what I
Yeah, so what led to the nickel plating? Or to make it even incredibly reflective, which I'll show. I'm gonna go back.
It came down to the shoes, because the shoes, the silver-plated shoes I did first for the show in Paris. And that was really taking the idea of my mother silver-plated all of our first pair of shoes. So it took that very, very simple idea and taking my shoe and creating the show out of that.
And these are your size shoes, right?
They're a little bigger, but
Okay.
yeah,
So this is the show in Paris that you did it.
yeah.
And then this is an installation
Mhm.
upstairs. So there's there's an interesting parallel.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I really going through, and this show came to be what it is because of, even what I was thinking about in my own personal work. So I think it, is I think it's very personal. And I think that is something important when people walk in, that they do feel like it's not like something that you feel something that I have been feeling myself.
Yeah, no, you definitely, I think, and that's what I appreciate, and I said in the beginning, is that you feel the presence, you see the presence of the designer or the artist in all the Selects shows. And with this one, I think it's even more pronounced in the sense that, I think by the fact that you can't go in it, and you've created this kind of performance stage, for this work and for the collection, I think makes it even that much more special and unique. And we have, I know that, I think these were two of your...
These were really special, and
Right.
the 18th century, the larger, there's the two larger.
Right, which I
mirrors
don't
were.
have an image of, but you can see upstairs. And I have to say that what's so interesting about doing these shows with designers is that you do discover our work. And I know Sarah Coffin from our Product Design Decorative Arts, you probably knew, a lot of these, but I certainly didn't. But I think we've never exhibited most of them, so to have the opportunity to finally get them out, cleaned, conserved, is very rare. And with a museum of 210,000+ objects, and for you to focus on this collection was great, and I think helped a lot. So have you ever designed any mirrors?
No.
Is that something you would want to do? No.
Yes.
Well, there is a mirror. There is a compact upstairs.
Oh yes, we did do a compact
And
in the
yeah,
mirrored room.
yeah.
So I guess I have.
Yeah. So is that something you want to continue? Do you see continuing this idea of mirrors and reflections in or do you think this is a theme you're done with it?
I'm not done with it, but because it's an ongoing, the idea of uniformity and reflection upon upon oneself, and just being comfortable with yourself. I think that's more the story that will stay with me. I don't need to do a mirrored room again. We'll never say never. But
I think the show could travel.
Okay. No, because I think there is an interesting interactive element to the installation as well. I think the silver shoes, the world we live in, everybody loves to see what everyone is doing during their day, and I think the installations that I think the city has sometimes of objects around the city and people taking pictures of themselves with the objects. I think there's something interesting about people interacting with art that way. And I think the silver shoes, I think it is interesting to see people trying to put those shoes on because they look so big, but in actuality, because they're stiff. They are solid. So actually getting in them is not as easy as it looks.
I tried.
Yeah.
I did try. I got into one.
Yeah. But I think people interacting with art, I think, is fun.
Yeah. And we're working on this possibility of trying to place them around the city.
Yeah.
If we can get a few permits in place. I'm going to ask just one final question, and then I'm going to, I think, throw it open to the audience. I'm sure there's lots of questions. But I'm curious, you started off with menswear, and then you took on women's wear. Is one more difficult than the other? Or are they just different?
They're just different. I approach them really the same. I think women's is somewhat more challenging just because there's been a lot more done for women. With men's, men's, there's only so much you can really do. And I think I've pushed it, pretty far with men's. With women's, I think it's limitless on what you can do. And I love the challenge.
So anything coming up that you're particularly focused on? I mean, beside the next show, is there is there sportswear? I know you've done sportswear, but is there any other area of fashion that you want to get into? More shoes? Other shoes?
Well, we have a lot of shoes. No, I think we have so much that we do within the collections that, every season there's so much that's added and, brought into the whole mix. So, in fashion, no, I'd love for it to just be in my world. But I love, I love doing things outside of fashion as well. This is what was so interesting to do. Why it was so interesting to do this, because I love being, bringing my sensibility into other worlds as well.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience? And there's a mic. I think we're gonna have you speak into the mic because it's being streamed live.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't tell you that before.
Hi. Yeah, I just have a quick question about, obviously this is about uniformity, and, as you're talking about with this collection right here, it's all about almost like this 50s Americana office aesthetic. So I guess my real question is, where did you originally get that inspiration from, and why specifically? From your experiences, I guess, in your life, or where did that love for this kind of uniformity across the board come from?
It was really, it comes from a lot of different places, but I think I grew up in a big family, very classic middle American family, and my father dressed this way, and so it was something that I was very comfortable with. I grew up with it, and for me, what was more interesting to me, if I wanted to get in fashion, was to take something that I think most people thought was really boring and reinterpret it in a way that maybe it wasn't so boring anymore. And also too, it was like this, I was very conscious at the beginning to start with something that was so pure to what I wanted to put in front of people, and also something that I could really build on. And this was something that was very personal to me, and I knew that it wasn't going to be fashion because it was something very timeless and very personal that I always would want around.
Thank you.
I want to just one thing, because I notice a lot of students out here, and I'm not sure if you were a fashion design student, but what kind of advice would you offer fashion students today?
Learn how to make clothing. I think that's learn how to make patterns and learn how to make clothing. Because there's the most valuable people in the world of fashion are the people that know how to make patterns and know how to make the clothes. That's first.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that is so undervalued, and I think if you're wanting to get in fashion to be famous and to be rich, you shouldn't go into fashion. And then I think the other thing is really just be true to yourself, because no one can be you. And I think if you're true to yourself and you design something that is so true to you, even if people don't understand it, they will understand it that much more if it's very true to who you are and what you want to give people.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth. I'm not a fashion student, but if it's one of your designers, but doesn't have any degree from fashion, I was questionable about when she did it. So what is the next step can be become a designer?
Well, I wasn't a fashion student either, so.
Yeah, economic, yeah.
Okay. I think, the most important thing is to appreciate the craft of making clothing. And if you have an idea on your own, and it really comes down to making beautiful clothing for me. Because I think we live in a world that there's so much out there that I think real quality does stand out. And I think if you're not in fashion, you just have to get in fashion and intern at maybe someplace that is interesting to you, and just be ready to work, because it's a lot of work.
So what was your first job in fashion?
I was at Georgia Wine,
As a,
salesman. Well, I was the receptionist first. I got fired.
okay.
Brooke knows that.
Hi, I'm a fashion design student of Parsons, and I have some ideas for the installation for you. Can I email to you?
Sure.
Can I get your email address?
Yeah,
We'll see, yeah,
someone will get it to you.
Hi, how's it going? I just wanted to see if we could press you a little bit more on sort of your reluctance to label your work as art and label yourself as an artist, and sort of really get down to what you think the difference between art and design is.
I think I'm reluctant to label myself. I would rather, if somebody thinks that I am, then let them say that. I just like to focus on what I'm doing, and I love what I do. I love making clothing, but then I also love putting experiences in front of people, and I love to put installations together. I love to tell a story. I love to entertain, and that's what I'm gonna fess up to that, and I'll let other people then label that however they want to label it.
Hi, so you mentioned a few times that like an idea was beautiful or clothes were beautiful to you. I was wondering how you have an idea and like, no, it's beautiful, like what does that mean to you?
Well, it's instinctual, and I think it's simply that. I think it comes down to instinct. And, I think sometimes I do things that people maybe think aren't beautiful, and that's fine. But I know instinctually I feel that it is.
Well, and you talked earlier about sort of the criteria of beauty. I mean, something that has to be really well made. I mean, the fabrics that you select are extraordinary. I mean, they have a beautiful hand to them. So there's so that the beautiful textile qualities are things that are very important.
Well, the quality of the collections is really what is most important. And I think, because it is really the most important thing. And I think the quality, even in just how the shows are put together, everything is, they're very seriously thought out, and there's just a lot of thought that goes into them. And sometimes when the show comes together, it's even better than I even thought. It's all, I think you have to go with your instincts sometimes, because I think if you overstudy something, I think you can lose it. And I think if you overstudy something or overthink it or over-intellectualize something, it may not be as interesting as if you leave yourself open to just letting it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, because there's several articles that have come up with that these writers go very deep into,
Yeah.
you know, the intellectual or the philosophical ramifications of, you know, your collections, and it's, as you said, it can be a very simple
Well, yeah, I mean,
line or
sometimes,
narrative.
and I, of course, you put things in front of people and they will have their own interpretation of it, and that is great. But it's not always my interpretation. It is theirs, and I love that they have it, but my interpretation is a lot of times not as intellectual as they seem to want to make it. And yeah, sometimes it's very simple story and simple idea that can reference something more, but a lot of times it's not.
Hi. So many designers cite musical references in their work. We've had a few collections that look vaguely Gothic, or you bring up also your Catholic upbringing. Would you say that's a genre of music that you make reference to?
Gothic music? No.
Hi, I was wondering to what extent, I know that you said that you draw a lot of inspiration from dreams or personal experiences, but for the actual design of the clothing, do you draw any inspiration from any costume history in particular, or any designers?
I mean, that is a really good question, because I try to know as little as possible of what other designers are doing. Of course, referencing what has been done in the past is something that is important, but not doing as much research as I think a lot of people would want to do, because I feel sometimes it's crippling, because when you see something, there have been really amazing, beautiful things that have been done in the past, and sometimes when you actually see it, I think can sometimes be crippling because it's been done so beautifully, like why even try? So knowing as little in the world of fashion, I think, for me is important, because it makes it so much easier. And that's when I said ignorance is bliss.
And do you make your design team also be ignorant about fashion?
No, I don't make them do anything. But I think it does, because they are so talented, and they wouldn't be with me if they weren't, that I love just what comes out of their head. And I think that's just so much more interesting. And I really do believe it makes it easier. It really does make design easier, because it just frees you up. You can do anything, as opposed to seeing a reference or referencing something specific and trying to think, okay, how do I make it mine? And of course, we all have references in our head, but forgetting enough of it, I think, makes it yours.
Hi, actually I got a million questions for you, but time limit, so 2 questions. First, I know you were actor before you were designer.
A bad one, yeah.
Yeah. And because my major was not fashion design before. I was majoring English literature, so I would like to know, how do you overcome the gap? Like,
Well,
how
I think,
do you cross the gap?
yeah, I think what I said before, you really just have to get in fashion. I mean, I think I learn every day from, the people that work with me, because they are amazing designers. And I also have learned so much from Rocco, who was the tailor that I started with. And so you just have to do it. You just, if you're not in school and you want to be in it, you just have to get in it and start.
Great, so I think we have time for one more question. Raise your hand first.
Hi. I know you touched on earlier about how some people get upset that you have like a 20-minute long show, and I just was wondering, because I know I feel like we've all seen pictures that we were like, I can't imagine how that would look in person, and I wonder what your dream scenario would be to show your collections.
I don't know. I mean, the way that it works is you only have that much time. So I mean, the show is the show, and it's always going to be, you know, somewhat the same unless you want to. Yeah, I don't know how it would be different, and yeah, I guess it's just me crying that I want people to see it longer. But yeah, I think it's always going to be that way. So I don't know.
Thank you, Tom, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for